Good day. Today we'll discuss data collection and data encoding. I would like to give acknowledgement to my friend Dr. Imelda Garcia, who I actually got the data collection from one of her lectures. She already passed away. May her soul rest in peace. And these are the learning objectives for today's session that at the end, you will be able to identify sources of public health data. We'll discuss the importance and objectives of data collection and then explain the principles followed in the data collection and discuss the different techniques used in data collection, list and explain the characteristics of statistical data. Now, what is the purpose of data collection? Well, data forms the basis on which every important decision should be made. You collect data to evaluate programs or projects, to set priorities, to allocate priorities, to determine factors of causation or control of diseases, to assess health status of the population, really depending on the objective of your study or the objective of a program. Now, what are the principles in the data collection? Data to be collected should be in accordance with the objectives of the study. So it's very important that you look at the objectives of your study. And the collected information should be accurate. Later on, we'll be discussing the meaning of this accuracy. Samples should be adequate and representative of the population. We talked about this when we talked about sampling methodology. And subjects should be cooperative. Well, you really can't hold the respondents, but really it would be a lot better for you if the subjects are cooperative. And so you need to put the environment in such a way that subjects, your respondents, will be cooperative with you. Now, what are the methods that we use in collecting primary data? Primary data means these are the data that you would want that you yourself, the investigator himself, collects. Because there is such a thing as secondary data where we just collect data, investigator collects data from previous data that have been collected in the past by persons other than the investigator himself. And we'll be discussing to you methods of collecting primary data. So we have this through observation. Second is through interview, using survey questionnaire, experimentation, registration and recording, and lastly, case study. Now, we won't discuss much experimentation because this does not seem to be part of the course in research 1, and we won't discuss as well case study. Now, for small scale study, the most commonly used methods are the interview, questionnaire, and use of questionnaire and observations. Now, let's discuss each of these one by one, except, as I said a while ago, experimentation and case study. So let's stop first of observation. That is a systematic method of collection of data that relies on the researcher's ability to gather data through their senses. And so, what do you observe? You observe verbal and non-verbal communication. You observe the surrounding atmosphere, habits, culture, situation. And this observation can be done through experimentation, and you need to keep a meticulous records of what you observe, because what you see isn't always what you get. You need to understand that actual behavior, when you do observation, actual behavior is documented rather than responses related to the behavior. The observed can act differently when surveilled. And the researcher's observation are likely to be biased by their own views. Now, there is such a thing as the Hawthorne effect, where people tend to increase their production if they know that they are being observed. So we need to understand this, and really we also need to understand that we cannot literally observe everything. Now, we have different types of observation. We have what we call the structured observation, which is highly systematic, and you rely on predetermined criteria. So you have a checklist of predetermined criteria. These are the things that you would want to observe, and it could be related to people, events, practices, issues, behaviors, actions, situations, and phenomena that you want to observe. But of course, this predetermined criteria should be based on the objectives of your study. Now, we also have what we call a semi-structured observation, where observers generally use some manner of observation schedule or checklist, very much the same as that of the structured. We need to organize the observation. That's the purpose of the structured. But during the process of observation, the observer also attempts to observe and record the unplanned or the unexpected. So aside from the ones in the checklist, you would want to record as well those that are not planned, that are not expected, that are not listed in the checklist. So that's semi-structured. And lastly, the unstructured observation, where observers do not have any predetermined criteria, and they attempt to observe and record data as they see things happening. So that unstructured, that is unstructured observation. You don't have any predetermined criteria or checklist. Now, let's go to the steps to effective observation. First, you determine what needs to be observed. If you are talking, for example, of a structured observation, you plan, prepare checklist, and how to record the data. You select the participants. You can use a random selection or a non-random selection depending on the sampling methodology that you would want to use. And then you conduct the observation. You take note of the venue, the duration. You need to know how long should you observe, and then the recording materials. And then you compile the data collected, and then you analyze and then interpret the data collected. Now, the second method of data collection is interviews. And this is an effective way of gathering information. And they can be conducted face-to-face, or by telephone or online interviews, especially now during these times. Online surveys are very much popular nowadays because we can't go to people, and so online surveys or interviews are a lot easier, or through mails or emails. And this involves verbal and non-verbal communications. Now, we also have different types of interviews. We have a structured interview, very much the same as that of a structured observation, where you use predetermined questions. So you already have a checklist. You have predetermined questions that you ask in a predetermined order using a standard mode of delivery. You also have a semi-structured interview, which is neither fully fixed, fixed means structured, or fully free. So there is some flexibility in a semi-structured interview. So you interview the respondents using a pre-established questions, and then if the respondents if you need to ask the respondents for things that are not written in the interview, you're free to ask questions that you think should be asked. So there is some flexibility in a semi-structured interview. And lastly, this is an unstructured interview where you attempt to draw out information without the aid of predetermined questions. You don't have any checklist, you don't have any prepared questions. You just draw out information as you go, as when you go to people you want to interview. You are fully free to ask things that you would want to ask. And these are the steps to an effective interview. You select your subjects or key informants, who will be the people that will most likely give you information that you like. Then you conduct the interview, and then you analyze and interpret data from the interview. Now, what are the advantages of an interview? Interviews yield relatively more complete, accurate, and consistent information. And you get a greater proportion of usable returns, since more people will respond when they are approached or directly contacted, meaning the yield is very high when you do an interview. You get results right away. And the interviewer is able to clarify any misinterpretation by the respondent. So if you think that the respondent does not seem to understand your question, you can clarify with when you do interview. But interviews too have limitations. They are more expensive. You need to hire people. If you need to interview a lot of people, you need to hire a lot of people to do the interview. You can't have just one interviewer, so it comes out to be more expensive. You will have to go to the places, so you spend a lot for your transportation, for your allowance, for your meals, etc. So generally, interviews are more expensive than later on we talk of survey questionnaire. And the interviewer's behavior may deliberately or unintentionally influence the respondent's reply. Meaning, if I want the respondents, for example, to reply the way I want them to, and then I can ask loaded questions. And so the interviewer may be subject to 4 types of biases. These are: he might ask questions that may lead to the respondents to give answers that reflect the interviewer's prejudices. So he can give loaded questions. He may note down those responses that he expects than those actually stated by the subject, by the respondent. So he might not note down the exact answers of the respondents. He may tend to favor certain responses wanted by those conducting the survey, and he may turn in dishonestly collected information. Now, let's go to the next survey questionnaire. And this is actually one of the most common data collection instrument, survey questionnaire. And we have basic types of survey questions. We have what we call open-ended questions. These are unstructured questions. So you ask open, there is a question, and then people can answer the way they want to answer. So there is free response. Subjects use their own words for the response, and you encourage a full, meaningful answer using the subject's own knowledge and our feelings. And this can generate actually candid data, but it can be difficult to analyze. But the data will be difficult to analyze when you do open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are more often used in qualitative research. When you do, for example, FGD, and then open-ended questions. We use open-ended questions for FGD, for example. Close-ended questions, these are structured questions, and these questions force respondents to choose from a range of predetermined responses. And generally, it's easy to code and to analyze statistically. So questions can be dichotomous. So there are two choices, or it can have multiple choice. So examples of response for closed questions, dichotomous, so yes or no answers can be yes or no, or agree or disagree. So do you drink alcohol? Or you can have a multiple choice question. So choose from a list, what would you drink more often? And then rating questions, you can have a rating scale. So you can have a Likert type scaling. So is it normal for teenagers to binge drink? So you have this: agree, strongly disagree, disagree, unsure, agree, and strongly agree. So this is a Likert scale. And ordering options, place the following in the order of preference of what you drink. And then you can have different questioning techniques. We have a self-administered questionnaire. We have a face-to-face interview, telephone interview, and email. And the questionnaire can be self-administered by the respondent. Therefore, all instructions contained in it are meant for the respondents. And you have an interview schedule. These are lists of questions to be addressed by the interviewer to the respondent. You can also have an interview guide, and these are the list of topics that the interviewer expects to cover in the course of the interview. And let's have some tips to making good questionnaire. You need to plan a user-friendly format, because if the format is not user-friendly, then people might not want to answer your questions. And you gather demographic data like age, sex, marital status, occupation only when necessary. And then you need to guarantee anonymity. As a matter of fact, you don't want to identify these people, especially because we have the Data Privacy Act. And then you ensure ease of the tabulation. If you can use Scanton forms, better. And then you ask well phrased and ambiguous questions that can be answered, especially if you are doing a survey questionnaire, self-administered. Questions have to be very, very clear. Don't ask ambiguous questions. And then develop for completeness. You get all the data. And lastly, you pilot test the instrument. So before you give out the questionnaire, you need to pilot test your instrument, your questionnaire. Now, remember, you should include in the questionnaire an introductory statement about the purpose of the survey, a motivational reason why respondents should take it. So you need to motivate, not just the reason, a motivational reason to motivate respondents why they should take it. And the instructions should be clear, use simple language, and short. You don't make a questionnaire that's very long, because if you do, chances are your respondents would not want to answer them. They should be user friendly. As we said, you avoid difficult and ambiguous question. And lastly, a reminder to the participants that they are taking the survey anonymously, that they won't be identified. They won't be identified. Now, what are the advantages of questionnaire? Useful for qualitative and quantitative data information. That's easiest to administer, but it's difficult to construct. Unlike an interview, it's easy to construct but difficult to administer. In a survey questionnaire, it's easy to administer. You just give out the questionnaire to people, but really it's difficult to construct. And biases of the interviewer are eliminated because you are not there. And then the respondent can fill out the form in the privacy of their homes at their own convenience. And confidential information that could not be given in a direct interview may be more freely divulged because the respondents understand that they are anonymized. And a wide area may be covered within a short period of time. So you can have a wide coverage. You can cover a large group of people in a much shorter period of time. But there are limitations as well for questionnaire. Low response rate. The yield is very low. If you can give out, for example, 5,000 questionnaire to 5,000 people, you'll be happy to get 1,000. The yield is much lower than if you do interview, face-to-face interview. And vague terms cannot be clarified if the researcher is not there. And so that's the reason why when you give out a questionnaire, you don't put vague terms. You need to be very, very clear in your terminology that you use. And open-ended questions will not get much response. So you don't, as a matter of fact, when you do a survey that you give out to people, you refrain from making open-ended questions. And usually does not work well with the elderly and poorly educated population. So that's why you need to know who your respondents will be. Now, what are the steps to an effective survey questioning? You prepare the survey questions, you formulate, choose types of survey questions, you write instructions, and then make copies. Select the respondents, administer the survey questionnaire, taking note of the date, the venue, and the time, and tabulate the data collected, and then analyze and interpret the data collected. Just to remind you that when you make a survey questionnaire and self-administered questionnaire, you need to put the time that they will finish the questionnaire. And you don't give much, a very long questionnaire. 30 minutes actually is already long, so less than 30 minutes will be better, because the longer the time that the respondents will be able to answer your questions, the less likely that they will answer your questions. So experimentation, as I said, we won't discuss this anymore. And then registration and recording, another way to collect data, is routine collection of data through an established system of recording of events as they occur. And the case study, which we won't discuss anymore. Now, let's go to characteristics of the data that you need to collect. Data have to be accurate. Accuracy means closeness of a measured or computed value to its true value. So the value that you get, it should measure the true value. So that's the meaning of accuracy. So truthful and correct. How close to the bullseye. Later on, we'll be talking of the bullseye. Now, precision means repeatability. And that's stability or consistency of the information. You always get consistent information. So the data that you get is precise. And it means sharply defined or measured. There is repetitiveness of data and how data are close to each other. So let's just differentiate to you precision from accuracy. So this one is both accurate and precise, and this one is accurate but not precise. Well, and this one is neither accurate nor precise. This one is precise, I should say. This one is precise but not accurate, and this one is neither precise nor accurate. But really, I would like to say that precision, that accuracy, I should say, that accuracy presupposes precision. I mean, you cannot be accurate and not precise. I mean, it doesn't make sense to have an accurate data but not precise. So I normally say accuracy presupposes precision. Now, another characteristic of statistical data is completeness. That's adequacy and representativeness of the sample size. And lastly, validity. Validity is the extent to which a technique measures what it is supposed to measure. So an instrument is valid if it measures what it is supposed to measure. So we have what we call the internal validity, the validity of the inferences drawn as they pertain to the actual subjects of the study. So your study, for example, the data that you collect is actually valid to the actual subjects that you collect. That's internal validity. Because there is such a thing as external validity, and this is also the same as generalizability, meaning the validity of the inferences is not only true to the data that you collect, to the actual subjects that you collect, but it is also true to people, objects outside the study population. That is external validity. So for example, if you make a study in a particular hospital, and then the results are valid in that particular hospital, but if I want to generalize your results outside that hospital where you collected the data, and then we say that your study is externally valid. Meaning, you need to tell us, the researcher needs to tell us whether the study can be generalized even outside the population where they collected the data. That's actually called external validity. Now, let's go to data encoding. How do we encode data in Excel? You need to, when you give your data, really, admittedly, analyzing the data is difficult. It is not really the aim of, it's not really the responsibility of the researcher to analyze the data himself. The researcher has to give his data to a biostatistician or to a statistician to analyze the data. And so, when he gives the data to the biostatistician, he needs to encode the data correctly. And so we'll discuss to you encoding data to Excel. And these are the things that you need to remember in encoding data to Excel. Rows are cases. Each row represents a case. If you're familiar with Excel, Excel has rows and columns, and rows are cases. And each row represents a case. Each individual respondent to a questionnaire is a case or a subject. And columns represent variables. Each column represents a variable name or a characteristic that you want to measure. Each item on a questionnaire is a variable. Each item is a column. So for example, ID number, the age, sex, weight, height, etc. In the first row, that's row 1, contains the variable names. First row contains the variable names. Subsequent rows contain individual subjects. And so there are as many rows plus 1 as there are subjects or cases. So for example, if you have 100 cases, 100 subjects, and there will be 100 plus 1 rows or 101 rows, because the first row is contains the variable names, and the second row will be the first patient, and then the last or subject or participant, and then the last row 101 will be the last participant. And some generalization or some rules in writing the variables. Variable names must begin with a letter. Must begin, meaning it should not begin with a number. And the remaining characters can be a letter, and a digit, a period, or symbols like this. But special characters like this cannot be used. You don't use these special characters as variable names in the variable names. And variable names must not end with an underscore or a period. So you don't end a variable name with an underscore or a period. You can have an underscore in a variable name, but not at the end. You don't put that at the end. Each variable must be unique, meaning no duplication is allowed. And variable names are not case sensitive. Names like this are all considered identical. They are all considered identical. So values for a particular case and variable are called cells. So the values are called cells. And so each cell contains a single value of the variable for a case or for a respondent. And cells for a particular variable should be encoded as numeric. So you need to encode them numerically if that variable is to be included in the analysis. Quantitative data must have consistent units of measurement for a particular variable. For example, if the variable is age and it is reported as age in years in one cell, all other cells must have age in years. You don't put in one cell age in months, and then in another cell, age in years. So cells should have consistent units. Nominal or qualitative data should take numeric codes. For example, sex, male can take a numeric code of 1 and females 2. Because as we said, cell should be encoded as numeric, as numeric. And cells can contain formula, but strings, alphabets may be included in the data to be encoded if one so desires, like names of the subjects, but they cannot be included in the analysis. But of course, now, when we discuss to you data collection, we told you to avoid getting the names of the subjects so that you don't put this anymore. You don't write, as a matter of fact, the names of the subject in Excel to be given to the biostatistician. Now, so we won't discuss this anymore because we don't want you to put strings or alphabets. Now, numeric cells must not contain non-numeric characters. So this is an example of data that's encoded. So you will note that the age here is age in years. So this is actually 0.6 years. So this is about one half, about 6 months or 5 point something months. And then the weight, and then look at this one. These are in numeric, and you cannot know, you won't know the meaning of this one, symptom, and then you talk of 4, x-ray, and then you talk of 1. So you need, therefore, because we don't know the meaning of this one, sex 1, 2, we don't know what that means, so those means. So you need to make a code. Later on, we'll talk about coding manual. Now, some issues in data encoding: a mutually exclusive variable should have 1 column. Mutually exclusive means one category, there's only one, one category excludes the other category. For example, sex is a mutually exclusive variable. You can either have a male or a female. So if you have a male, it mutually excludes a female. So a female can't be a male, so that's mutually exclusive. And if data, a variable is mutually exclusive, it should be entered in 1 column. So for example, so this is an incorrect encoding. Sex is mutually exclusive. You don't encode this in 2 columns. They should be just encoded in 1 column. So this one is a female, then this one is a male, and so to encode that correctly, so just say 2 for females and 1 for males. In a questionnaire that measures a condition, say quality of life, physical activity, etc., each question is encoded in 1 column. If the question does not have multiple answers, meaning if the question is mutually exclusive, that question is mutually exclusive, there is only 1 answer, and then that question has to be encoded in 1 column. Now, so example, so do you think it is shameful to have TB? So this is just 1 column. This is just 1 column. Yes, no, just 1 column. Now, if yes, why? You ask why, and then multiple answers allowed. Now, if you have this question, why, and then you say multiple answers are allowed, meaning it is not mutually exclusive, you can have multiple answers. Now, if you have this questionnaire, and then each option should be a column. So this one is 1 column, another column, another column, another column when you encode that in Excel. So let's try to look at it in Excel. So is it shameful to have TB? In 1 column, it's 1 for yes and 2 for no. And if yes, you ask why. And then these are the choices. It is contagious, you can lose your job, people will avoid you, and it is not socially acceptable. You will note that each of these options is a column because you can have multiple answers. So if you check yes, put one, yes, yes, and then no. And then this one, is it shameful to have TB? You don't have a answer. You don't have answers for this one because the question says if yes, why? So you only answer if you can only have choices here. You can only have answers here if your choice here is one or yes. And so this means that this person did not check contagious. He checked you can lose your job, but he didn't check people will avoid you. It's not socially acceptable, etc. Now, no more than one information in one column. Another rule. For example, this one, gravidity G1P0. This is an incorrect because you have two information here. You have gravidity and you have parity. And then we told you that you have to have just you don't put non-numeric characters. And this one also is incorrect encoding. We have two information. You have here the systolic and we have the diastolic. So there should only be one information in a column. And this one, the slash is a non-numeric character. And then Apgar score for 1 minute and Apgar score for 5 minutes. This we have two information here, so this is incorrect. And again, the comma is a non-numeric character. So to correct this one, this is how you will need to encode this one. So you separate the gravidity from the parity. You separate the systolic from the diastolic. So we have two columns. Then you separate the Apgar in 1 minute and in 5 minutes. So Apgar in 1 minute and Apgar in 5 minutes. So this is the correct encoding. Now, we need to have a coding manual because data are encoded in numeric codes. As we told you, when data are qualitative, they have to be encoded in numeric codes. Values in the cells that are nominal or qualitative in nature are not comprehensible to readers. I mean, they won't understand it because these are codes. So that's why one needs to construct a coding manual where one may refer to if he were to understand the data. And there are many forms or types of coding manuals depending on the individual's preference. And the most important thing to remember in constructing the coding manual is it must convey to the reader or to the person using it the meaning of the codes. And basically, it must contain the following information: the meaning or description of the variable names of the coded cell. So this is an example of a coding manual. So this is the variable, and this is the variable, the description, the meaning, and then the code. So if you are talking of age and years, the actual value, you put there the actual value, and then for sex, 1 is equal to male, 2 is equal to female. For exposure history to PTB, 1 is positive, 0 is negative. Then the signs and symptoms, 0 is none, 1 is cough, etc. Actually have many. So these are examples of a coding manual. I think that's the end of this lecture. Thank you for listening.